Are there hard and fast rules about what a cookbook can and can't be? And if so, can you break them? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I am Molly Stevens, and today I'm here with my co-host, Kate Leahy. Hello, Kate.
Hello, Molly.
Many episodes ago, it was our wrap-up to Season 8, I believe, episode 162, if I'm correct. We were answering some listener questions, and one listener wrote in to ask about, I think they wanted to write, it was a real mashup. It was a fiction, cookbook, memoir, it was all sorts of things. And we started to talk about it, and I'm not sure who said, we're not the gatekeepers. You could do anything, right? And you brought up a book that you had just...
It had just arrived in the mail. It was Tanya Bush's cookbook / narrative nonfiction...
memoir, year in the life, yeah.
Called Will This Make You Happy? Stories and Recipes from a Year of Baking. This listener who had that question, this was a book that they should look at because they wanted something that was more than a cookbook.
Right. And you were quite taken with this book, both the look and feel, and also you had just dipped into it and said the writing is like really charming and interesting and propulsive. And so you reached out to Tanya, and she's our guest today.
She is. Now that we've both read the book, it's a coming of age story.
Yes.
It spans a year in a life. It covers 4 seasons. It starts in the pandemic. It's like this dark, lonely winter. And then the author / Tanya, she moves in from being unemployed, unsure what she wants to do with her life, can't bake a cake, like just disaster. But then really just finds this need to continue to bake and to succeed in her own way. So, she goes to Italy and into a cafe in Brooklyn. It also goes into a lot of the very personal relationships in her life. It's not an easy story, but it's an easy read.
Yeah, and the recipes. So in each chapter has recipes, like real hardcore tested, vetted, the kinds of recipes you would find in a standard cookbook. So it really is this narrative cookbook. So Tanya, in addition to having written Will This Make You Happy, she also co-founded Cake Zine, and she's the pastry chef at Brooklyn-based restaurant Little Egg. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Paris Review, New York Magazine, and beyond. She's got a lot going on, and we're going to talk to her.
Let's bring her on.
Tanya, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Well, we are thrilled to have you here, and congratulations on this beautiful book. Kate and I have both tore through it, and because it's this narrative cookbook, it's a genre mashup, things we don't really see that much of. I guess our first question is, what came first? Wanting to write about this tumultuous year that ended up in you becoming a pastry chef, or wanting to create a book with recipes?
I think they were inextricably linked from the start. Because I am a self-taught baker, I spent a lot of time perusing and ingesting cookbooks while I was trying to teach myself how to bake. It was, the early days of the pandemic. I was depressed. I was unemployed. I was very much sort of adrift, and it was the, banana bread sourdough era. So, I turned to my kitchen, as many of us did. And a lot of the cookbooks that I was encountering were these sort of like glossy tomes. They were offering these perfect recipes, like hyper contrast photos, like the best chocolate chip cookie. It felt a little bit alienating to me. I think like my experience learning how to bake was so much like messier, and there was a lot of humiliation and, ecstasy involved. And there was so much sort of narrative, living happening outside the context of the recipe itself and the testing of something. So when I began reflecting on that year and sort of my journey into pastry, it made a lot of sense to marry a technical text, a story about learning how to bake and how to fall in love with your own ability again, alongside a very sort of like technical book. So I think that from the very offset, I was interested in that, meaningful marriage.
Did you always want to be a writer? Was that a primary goal before, say, this year even happened?
No, not really.
Wow.
I think that I've always liked to write. You know, I started this Instagram account, Will This Make Me Happy, during the pandemic that was sort of lambasting the notion that baking was going to, you know, quell my existential dread. And that was, you know, in certain ways an opportunity to start writing publicly, right? I was offering these very sort of like bite-sized existential captions that were sort of like reflecting my mood and the sort of like mood of the moment. But I never really thought of it as like a viable career path. You know, I think it didn't seem like it was going to be financially remunerative. I think that I was like, who am I to write something? But I've always really loved reading, especially novels, and propulsive storytelling was, you know, at the forefront of my mind. And so it felt to me as I was learning how to bake that there was this like natural narrative arc in it, both in the recipe itself and also in the learning something new. So while I didn't like set out to be a writer, it felt like a natural form for the thing that I was doing.
Were you always documenting what you were doing at that time?
I was journaling a lot at that moment. I tend to journal when I'm either like doing really well or doing really poorly. Never really in the in-between. It's always the extremes. And
I relate to that.
Yeah.
Totally. It's harder to sort of capture the mundane, but when you're, you know, like cloistered away in your home, feeling listless and lost, I think like a diary became an outlet. So I was bemoaning my situation pretty consistently, which was, you know, ended up being very helpful when I was writing the book to have, you know, pretty detailed notes from the time. You know, when I went to Italy, I was writing like once, if not twice a day, because I was just having such a sort of strange and unnerving experience. But again, I feel like I've been in a little bit more stable of a period. And so I have not been turning to the page quite as much.
Yeah, that Italy section, I mean, we'll get to that, but you almost couldn't believe it if you didn't have documented it because it's so insane.
Ugh. How did you meet your agent?
Yeah, my agent, Claire Mao, she slid into my DMs.
Ooh.
There was this piece that was written about me in Eater by Dana Evans, and she'd written sort of a profile of like the project that I was doing on Instagram.
The Will This Make You Happy
Will
Instagram.
This Make Me Happy? Exactly. I had been like writing a little bit, and I kind of knew of Claire through some friends of friends, and I like really liked her list because she represents a lot of both like narrative fiction and nonfiction writers alongside food folks. And she basically sent me a DM being like, hey, I think what you're up to is cool. You know, if you ever have an idea, like, let's hang. I was very excited because I had sort of this idea percolating. And so we ended up having a drink, and, you know, then it took a while for things to really get off to the races. But I feel very lucky that she's my agent. She's really just so incredible, so supportive, my champion and advocate at every turn. And I'm also grateful that I was spared the, you know, querying process as well.
Right.
You have an MFA from Hunter College, right, in creative writing. So at what point did that happen?
Yeah, so I'd been working on the book proposal with my agent for some time, and I knew we were going to go out with it. I also knew that there was generally a pretty like long runway for book contracts from, you know, like nascent stages to completion. And I wanted support. I knew that I wanted deadlines. I knew that I wanted community. I wanted feedback without having to sort of pester my friends all the time. So I applied into the MFA, and then actually the, you know, fall that I matriculated, we sold the book.
Wow.
Basically right around the same time.
That is so interesting to me because when I read your acknowledgments and I saw Hunter College, I thought, oh, did this book emerge out of an MFA program? You had to do a project in your MFA and it just happened to be this. And that's how you found your agent. And that's how you started your publishing journey. But no, you had the agent, you had the idea, you used that MFA program to get the words down, to get that feedback. Before you took this book out to sell it, what shape was it in? Is it pretty much like how it reads now?
No. It was a half-formed thing in a lot of ways. So initially I had aspirations to write it all in the imperative because, you know, like obviously a recipe is generally sort of involves a reader. There is this sort of like collapsing between the reader and the writer, which worked for 20 to 30 pages. But when you start to extend that, it becomes really trying. And, there's also a reason that there are very few books written in the second person.
Yes.
So that was a big shift, which we figured out pretty soon.
We being you and Claire, or...
We being me and Claire, we being me and every single person, editor, friend who I was constantly bombarding with questions about what was working, what was not.
You're like, first 10 pages, fine, but now we need to get out of the second person.
Yeah, you start to fatigue from it. There was also a moment in which I thought that I would have the narrative section and then the recipes at the end, as opposed to having them fully integrated throughout, which also pretty quickly was clearly just not exactly what I was made sense. I had this sort of concept of a Mobius strip. So if you literally flipped the book, you could read, you could just get the recipes.
Yeah.
And then if you flipped it the other way, you would just have the story.
That's what Molly was thinking when she was reading this book. Oh, this could have happened.
And a back jacket could be an upside down front jacket and you would flip it.
Oh my God. I mean, I still love that idea. I did originally sell the book with them in the back, but it made so much more sense to have them earnestly and meaningfully entwined, because I think that's very much what's interesting about recipes and their relationship to living, is that it is at that intersection where interesting insights emerge. It was a tough sell. I was in a very different stage in my career. I mean, this is over 4 years ago now, I guess.
Wait, can I just back up to ask you the timeline? Because the book starts 2020, 2021?
Yeah, 2020 into 2021, yeah.
And then you start working in earnest in hospitality in that year. You're baking as your profession by the end of the year. But then when did the writing start?
Oh, I mean, a few years later. I think it was maybe 2.5, something like that. When I started the MFA that fall, that spring, we opened Little Egg, and I guess I've been there for a little over 3 years now. There were some gaps. And also, as I sort of mentioned in the preface, I like calling this book a narrative cookbook. I think that it takes place over the course of a year because that is a really useful device. And also because no one wants to read a sort of documentary style rendering of that period of my life, but it wasn't so neat. It wasn't a perfect little year. There's some condensing happening, some tweaking to the timelines being made in order to make it, read pleasurably. It's meant to be narrative. And so I gave myself license to prioritize that.
We talk to a lot of people about cookbook proposals, and we have a pretty good grasp on what a cookbook proposal looks like. But with narrative, how much of the narrative was written out?
Well, don't do it like me, because it was a tough sell, which I think was the result of a lot of things. I think it was the moment in time. I think that it was really this moment where utility and function were and continue to be privileged in cookbook writing writ large. And also I was just much younger in my career. And also I think that I could have had more material to allow editors to really envision exactly what it might be. But I think I'd sort of hit the phase where I wanted a thought partner. My agent was sort of it's ready to go. It was, again, a map of the recipes, a map of the structure, but then, a number of chapters.
Sample chapters.
Yeah, sample chapters, exactly, that were narrative. And, the whole narrative, fully mapped out, sort of what it's going to look like. And of course, those things, shifted over time a little bit.
We've also heard quite a bit that memoir is a hard sell. I'm wondering, especially earlier in your career when, people who's Tanya Bush and why are we reading her
100%.
memoir?
Yeah, who's this random girl? I think for me, I was really interested in telling a coming of age story. And ideally I was hungry to share something that was messy and imperfect and riddled with rejection, which is really not something you see very often in the cookbook space, which I do think is also a harder sell than 100 best sheet pan recipes or whatever it is. Or, of course, the multi-Michelin star chef who's this was my path into back of house. So yeah, for many, many reasons, it was a harder sell than maybe we anticipated, but I'm very grateful that it worked out.
And I think you also say in your acknowledgments that you tried to stop writing this book countless times. So why did you want to stop writing it, and what kept you going forward?
It was a couple things. I was really anxious that I wouldn't be able to do this idea justice. I think that the notion of writing something really like narratively compelling and truthful and evocative alongside recipes that really made sense in the narrative and also were like teaching someone the fundamentals of baking felt like a really tall order. And I was, nervous. I was also working, opening Egg and working very full time there, doing my MFA and running Cake Zine.
My goodness.
And starting to freelance write at the same time. And so I just felt inordinately overwhelmed. And yeah, I think the prospect of putting something out that I wasn't proud of was really terrifying. And, there are publishing deadlines and money is given to you. And so there were junctures where I was like, can we give the money back? I'm not sure that I can do it in the way that I imagined I could. But what kept me going is, I think one, I had an incredible group of people and a team that really believed in the project, especially Claire, my agent, and Naomi Huffman, who helped me edit the book. They were both just really champions of it. And I think also, I really believed in its import in the broader food writing cookbook landscape. There should be more narrative in food writing. I think that the genre has really bifurcated the two. And I think that storytelling is such an important tool in teaching generally, and that we deserve more experimental, playful forms of cookbooks. And so I think that at the end of the day, I was even if it's not perfect, even if it's, my first book and I grimace or feel embarrassed when I look at it, which sometimes I totally do, it has its place and meaning to a lot of people. And I've been really surprised and thrilled that so many people have resonated with it. And I think it's really underscored that impulse from the beginning.
Yeah, I love the New Yorker piece that talks, everyone's like, oh, it's so novel what you're doing. Nobody's, Tanya's breaking new ground. And yet historically, there's a context for this type of writing.
Oh, yeah. There's obviously centuries of, interesting narrative food writing. I think that it's just really fallen out of fashion in the past, decade, I guess, in favor of, these very functional cookbooks that are offering a lot of insight and beauty and, are aspirational lifestyle objects. But I think that, publishers are less willing to gamble on something that is harder to categorize, and they don't know exactly how it's going to sell. When I had my proposal, it was hard for me to find comp titles.
I was wondering about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the general wisdom with comp titles is that you want them to be, I can't remember if it's 5 or 10 years, or I think it's 5 years, recent, and you want them to have sold well. And it was kind of hard to find books that were doing what I envisioned. And I do think it sort of betrays a lack of imagination in the publishing industry generally, that you have to say, this is what I'm trying to do. This exists already. When in fact, maybe it doesn't.
Right.
I wanted to ask about how you structured your narrative in general, because you mentioned it is a year, but it's a year loosely. You're combining some personalities, you're making it so it's very, and I have to say, I tore through the pages because it flows so well. And Molly and I know how much work it is to make something feel so effortless. So what were the challenges of crafting a narrative arc about your real life?
Well, I think having constraints really helped me. I think that's one of the reasons I really love baking, is that to me, it's this sort of beautiful mixture of rules to abide by and then a lot of freedom and play to delve into at the same time. I felt the same in the structure of the book. It's a tight year. I knew it was going to be seasonal. I knew that the recipes, I wanted them to get more difficult as the narrator is progressing in her skill set. I knew that, they would incorporate seasonal produce, that kind of thing. So having a really tight frame, a year, allowed me to literally map, this is what happened in the winter. This is sort of what happened in the spring. I'm going to move some things around a little bit, but I know that I have this very tight sort of frame within which I can create an arc. Also, all of the narrative sections correspond to the recipes as well. And so instead of just sort of staring down the blank page, I assign myself, every couple days or every week, like a short chapter. They're almost like vignette-like. And I would, plot out, okay, I know this happens here. I know this happens here. So I was able to do a good amount of like outlining, which I think was constitutive to the process. Like, I think that I'm not someone who can just stare at the blank document and just start writing. I really need direction.
Yeah.
So having some constraints really helped.
In terms of writing, you say you combined characters and, adjusted timelines, but obviously there's some people in your life who are still in your life that you've written about. We may not recognize them, but they recognize themselves, I'm sure. Do you, as someone writing about real people, do you get their permission? How do you navigate that as an author?
Yeah, I mean, when it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I was not going to like give the Italians this book and be like, hey guys, by the way, what do you think of this? For listeners who don't know, it sort of implodes in a dramatic fashion, which I won't get into to avoid spoilers.
Right.
But my partner was reading drafts from the very beginning, and he very much knew that like this was a project that I was endeavoring in. The crush character, I gave her a draft to read early on. And like, these are people who are just still very much in my life. And so it felt important to me that they feel comfortable with their representation, but while also knowing that like I'm representing myself in a very specific way. Like, this is a younger version of myself. She's pretty self-involved, narcissistic, fumbling, bumbling. And this is a narrative telling. And so I think that everyone who I've shared the book with, who is a part of it, has been like so lovely, excited, supportive. And I'm really lucky in that vein. I think that everyone sort of makes their decisions around that. I wasn't going to ask everyone involved, of course,
Sure.
But it felt important for some of the like more primary characters to make sure that they were comfortable with what I was publishing.
No, that's helpful. I'm just thinking for listeners who might be thinking, they had an experience and they want to reflect back on something in their life.
Yeah.
And I know some people get nervous about how to navigate that. So I appreciate your frank answer.
Yeah. Of course.
I have to go into the Italian chapter. So let's just frame it for listeners. You have this, let's call it an opportunity to go to Tuscany to work at an agriturismo for free in exchange for an experience. Things don't go well, but just without spoilers, tell us about Italy and what the purpose of that experience was for your narrative overall.
Well, yeah, it was my misguided attempt at eating, praying, loving. Didn't go so well.
Plenty of eating, though.
So much eating.
Not like in a good way.
Amount of food.
No,
yeah. I was punished through food. I mean, I did not, when I was experiencing it, think it was going to be like narratively interesting. I was having a like kind of devastating and very lonely time. What was interesting about writing about that for the book was that I had written an essay a couple years ago about my time in Italy for Guernica. In that essay, I had really focused on the sort of like torture of having to eat, like 6-course meals twice a day for 6 weeks. And I think that when I like decided that I wanted to revisit this section because it was such a formative period in my sort of coming into myself as a baker and as a pastry cook, I realized like there was actually so much that I learned there and that it had been really important for me. It had really crystallized what I found exciting and interesting about pastry, which was not what I was being faced with. It was a lot of persnickety, tweezer, tourist fare. And I think that like perfection and pursuing perfection for its own sake was something I was seduced by initially and then horrified by. And I think that period really helped me understand what I like about baking and, making comforting, nostalgic things for people that I love and things that I'm hungry for, which was so different than the experience I was having. So it was actually really fun to revisit it because I felt like, I have more critical distance now. Like a lot of time has elapsed since that, and I can look at it with a bit more clarity than I might have when I like had just, only 6 months later come back. So it was formative. a lot of this book is coming up against the traditional tropes of what you find in a lifestyle book or a cookbook. And did I want to have things go the way they did? Absolutely not. But was I, in retrospect, going to leverage them for the story? Absolutely. A lot of people are hungry for this kind of experience, this, gourmands traveling in Tuscany. And I wanted to sort of lay bare the reality.
Right. It's so interesting listening to you speak, Tanya, about the creation of this book and how it's a narrative retelling, but you've rearranged things and the layering of your text and your storytelling. And we will get into the recipes because this is a cookbook podcast after all, but the writing itself is so intricate and so carefully laid out. So, for example, the Italy chapter, the things you've chosen to leave in there or to put in there from what really happened, help us see you develop your confidence as a baker, as a chef, as a person. But we don't know what's happening at the time, but we come away and we're like, oh, she's discovering what she likes and what she doesn't like and learning your development. Similarly with the details about the boyfriend, that, and I don't want to spoil this, but your decision at the end, had you not dropped in these little details throughout, we would have questioned your decision. And we read those details not even knowing they're important until later. So this layering, this structuring, this ability to carry us along with your narrative, my question is, how many drafts? I mean, that takes an enormous amount of work to get it that finely tuned, and yet there's a lightness to it. It's an easy read.
Oh, thank you.
And yet nothing's extraneous. Nothing really could. These little details are like, oh, that's, and I say this having given it a second read, I'm like, oh, that's why that's there. There's no smoking gun. What is it? There's no...
The Chekhov's gun?
Yeah.
If there's a gun in the first chapter, it has to go off at some point.
All the guns go off, yeah.
Yes.
All the guns are going off.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Molly. I'm sorry you had to read it twice.
No, are you kidding?
I would not wish that.
No, it's a great read. It's a great read.
I'm so glad. Definitely there were a lot of drafts and a lot of sort of, at the beginning, figuring out acclimatizing to the structure, sort of playing around there, and then combing through on various other drafts and being like, this detail belongs here and this detail belongs here. But, this is my first book.
Yeah.
Never written a book before. So I think there was just a lot of revisiting the text and going back to different chapters and being like, okay, what does it feel like as a reader? I think I really wanted it to feel immersive and to sort of, in a certain way, the narrator is kind of like the every person, right? We've all sort of gone through an existential moment. We've all sort of flung ourselves into something new as a way to evade the difficult. And I think that while I was writing, I was very conscious of the fact that while there were going to be, really specific details to my life, I also wanted it to feel familiar. We've all had a long-term relationship in certain ways that maybe has lost its luster, or, worried about what we're going to do with our lives, how we're going to make money. And so it was a constant sort of balance of I want specificity in this, and this story needs to cohere and be, loyal to my story. But I also want this to, in the same way that one is following in the steps of the recipe writer, to feel sort of like someone who's reading it is like, yes, I too have, or I am maybe in the process of trying to find my way.
I want to get into the book itself as a physical object a little bit, because when Chronicle sent us copies of the book, it really did stand out from all the other books on my desk. And, just for listeners who haven't seen the book, the trim size is very interesting. I pulled off Margot's Got Money Troubles from my shelf, and it kind of matches up almost in the same trim size compared to, say, Dory Greenspan's Anytime Cakes book that came out last year, which has a more of a baking book trim size. The lovely choices of typography are different. And I'm kind of thinking, I know Chronicle is known for for its design, but I don't know if Chronicle does a lot of narrative nonfiction books. So I do feel like they really went all out with the design. And I wanted to know like how you were involved in those conversations.
I was very, very involved. I had a very strong opinions about how I wanted this book to look and feel. When we sold the book, I said, I will not sell it to someone who will put it in like a traditional cookbook trim size. It's a special trim size because it's bigger than a traditional hardcover novel, but it's much smaller than, the more sort of like square traditional cookbook format. I was very specific about wanting that because I knew it needed to live, equally well on the bedside table as it would on the kitchen counter. I also I have a galley kitchen. It's really small. Counter space is at a premium. And so even having a big cookbook splayed out can, cannibalize a lot of counter space.
Sure. Yeah.
And I knew that also the physical object mattered a lot in messaging what this book is going to be. So I worked really closely with Lizzie, who is the lead designer at Chronicle, and she is truly incredible. And she really brought this vision to life. I knew I wanted the narrative sections to feel to have wide margins and to feel more traditional. We're using a Garamond font. Then there to be a very distinct feel for the recipe section. So that when you've turned the page and you've moved into the winter recipes, that you're in a different moment, but that it's all sort of cohesive in its way. So it took a good number of tries to get it right, but I'm so grateful to Lizzie for everything that she did. She's just, such an amazing, talented designer, and she really just went above and beyond with this book. So I'm really grateful.
For anyone who has not seen the book, there are 4 chapters. I'm not giving anything away. The seasons, we go winter, spring, summer, fall. And then each narrative chapter is followed by recipes that go with that chapter. The food photography is with the recipes, the illustrations is with the text.
Yes.
So I guess I'm curious when that came about. But then the other bigger question I have is that the recipes tie to the narrative closely, but not exactly. The titling is different. There's a more sort of general sense in the narrative. Not every recipe shows up in the narrative. Not every mention of food shows up in the recipes. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know. Or did I make that up?
No, you didn't make that up. So the recipes, they all do correspond to the narrative in some way, but it's not always so obvious. So sometimes it's the narrator has made it and failed and humiliated herself. And then, this is the finished product that took 10 rounds of testing to make right. Sometimes it's a smell or a memory that evokes the recipe. So it's not quite as obvious at all times. Sometimes it's a color or something a bit sensory and a little less obvious. And I think to your earlier question about the illustration and photos, I knew from the offset that I wanted illustration. I sold the book with Forsyth Harmon, who is an incredible painter and illustrator. And that is because I think that I had often felt a bit alienated by these hyper stylized photos. In every cookbook that I see, if my cake didn't look exactly the way that the very food styled cake did, I would feel in some ways like a failure. And I wanted to build out the narrator's world visually. And so that's what we use the illustrations for. We have expired prescription bottles in a medicine cabinet or, a burned hand with a tea bag.
Yeah, that one was, I think I saw the illustration and then I read what happened in the text. It was like, oh, so another not spoiler. That's a teaser. That's a teaser, everyone who's listening.
Totally. And then the photos were shot fully in my home. I knew I wanted some visual representation of the recipes. There are not very many, so there's not even photos for half the recipes, which was intentional because, again, I don't love when it feels like I'm aspiring to this thing that, took so many hours to make beautiful in a studio. And we shot it in my home, and they were much more sort of in process feeling. Vanessa Granda is a fashion photographer. She's really incredible and talented. We wanted it to feel sort of more British in sensibility, if you will. It's not so hyper contrast. She doesn't traditionally shoot that much food. And so we wanted them to feel lived in and inviting and also, sort of evolving as the seasons are changing. So the light is like a lot bluer in the winter, and then in the spring it gets a little bit, greener. By the summer we're like full lush color, and in the fall it's getting like sort of golden again. So we wanted that, all of these moving parts to sort of build the narrator's world, build the world of both the recipes that are coming from a different time and the story.
In addition to the different typeface and the different, photo versus illo, there's a different voice in the recipes.
Mm-hmm.
The writing process, are you sitting down and working on recipes and narrative at the same time? Or are you like putting on different hats when you do it? I mean, it's your voice, but it's different.
Yeah. I mean, that was very intentional. The recipes are written from a place of expertise, right? I've been working professionally in kitchens for years. All of these recipes are tested rigorously, both at home and in the restaurant. So I wanted to offer, an empathetic, supportive voice, but, also like, I've been doing this. Whereas, the narrative voice is, again, I really wanted it to feel immersive. It's, it's written in the present tense, which is meant to sort of, foist you into the narrator's world. And so I was sort of moving between, as I was writing the book, I would sort of take refuge in testing a recipe if I was having a bad time writing, and vice versa. I saved all the head notes for sort of towards the end, because I knew that there was so much writing that had to be done. So much writing of the recipes themselves, which Sinai Limwan, who is an incredible novelist and recipe writer, cookbook author, helped me wrangle into fighting shape, because I write a lot of my recipes for restaurant cooks. And so, making sure that they are as functional and useful for a home cook was really important to me. So I was bopping between, I would say, and again, feeling sort of eternally overwhelmed by all the dessert and baking content that was percolating.
Did you ever get hung up on the conflict between, or tension between how you started off, where recipes are tyrannical and they set us up for failure because, we don't know what we don't know, and yet now you're writing recipes?
I think that I'm offering a pretty specific approach to baking, a philosophy in this book. It's very much about using your senses and being experimental in the kitchen. I think a lot of people are really scared of baking because they think it's chemistry, and if they don't adhere to the rules exactly as written, everything's going to fail. And if it doesn't turn out exactly right, they are self-flagellating. One of the things I really encourage in this book is getting in touch with your senses and your own palate. I bake in the same way that a lot of people cook. I'm touching, I'm tasting, I'm noticing, I'm smelling. So while I did have to offer baking times, for example, or, temperatures, I'm also at the beginning of the book and sort of ad nauseum in each recipe being touch, your oven is going to be different than my oven. I very rarely offer bake times. I'll offer maybe a window to my pastry cooks when I'm working. But again, I think I was able to reconcile, some ambivalence I have around the recipe with the idea that hopefully my reader is feeling like these are, suggestions and ideas, but, they should get to know what they want, what works for them, play, experiment. I very rarely mise things out. And maybe one of the readers of this book is the same, or maybe they like to have everything, perfectly aligned. And, I hoped that there was room for both.
I have to say, sometimes when I read, say, a book that's either a novel or a narrative nonfiction, and it happens to have recipes, oftentimes those recipes feel extraneous, they don't need to be there, or they're just at the end and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? And I do think the way that you wove the narrative with the recipes in each season really works, because I want to make these recipes after reading this story. There's this very kind of interesting, intricate dance that's happening.
It feels like it's equal weight throughout the book.
You're curious about the banana bread. You want to know what it really is going to taste like after reading the story. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the whole notion of a narrative cookbook to me is that both parts, the story and the recipe, are equally constitutive of the final product. And you strip away the recipes, this book doesn't really work. You strip away the narrative and this book doesn't really work. It's only in tandem that the most interesting parts of it sort of flourish. I don't know the exact page count, but I wanted them to feel pretty balanced. And I was very hopeful that, so much of the impetus for this idea was that, like, if you read someone's story about pleasure and desire and rejection and excitement and humiliation, like, in a certain way, that's going to help you be a little more empathic to yourself. And hopefully it galvanizes you into the kitchen. Like, if you've seen someone else make something really delicious or make a Madeleine pockmarked with like bits of gross egg white, you're sort of like, okay, maybe I can try this. This random girl was able to do it, and now she's a pastry chef, So I do really believe in the power of like a good story to hopefully get people into the kitchen.
Yeah. I have a business question for you. If you wrote a straight cookbook, the idea of selling audio rights or, film, TV option, not really happening. Well, as far as I know. But like in terms of, this book, it lends itself to more of these outlets for more people to find the work. I wanted to know if you could just talk a little bit about, like, say, anything that's happened since publication, if there's an audio version of this book, if there's, say, film and TV rights in the works, because you're right, this is a coming age story, and it's a very evocative one.
Totally. Yeah. So I did the audiobook. I narrated it.
Nice.
I had to audition.
My God, that would be I would never want to do that.
I've heard that before. It's hysterical.
It was funny. Yeah. So I did do the audiobook, which was really interesting and cool.
And the recipes? You read the recipes aloud?
Well, yes. And I really, not to slander my own audiobook, but like they made me do it. And I'm just like, who wants to hear me read, 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour? Like I was like, I don't know why they want this, but that was beyond my pay grade. And then as far as film and TV rights, I have an amazing agent, Ali at Kaplan Perrone. And yeah, we've been having some conversations.
Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of anomalous for, I guess, like a cookbook. But I think like a memoir, that's obviously
right.
like way more traditional. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting journey.
Right. Because I do think right now I'm hearing more in publishing about, obviously we know that, say, like genre mashups, which this is, right? Cookbook meets narrative nonfiction / memoir. It's hard to sell. But then when it sells and people really respond to it, then of course publishers are like, oh my God, genre mashups, we need more of them. But they're still hard to sell. So I'm kind of like, do you see this as a genre mashup?
Again, I think like people have been playing with the form of cookbooks for so long. Right. There were so many amazing books that I was like turning to for inspiration. I make no claim to be like the first to write a narrative cookbook by any means. I don't think I've encountered a book that's exactly this form, but I think there's so many different iterations of it. And I do think I was trying to like bring, really robust storytelling into the genre of cookbooks, which has been less common. So yeah, maybe it is a mashup in a certain way. And I'm really hopeful that there's more of this. I think like the UK especially has like really interesting dynamic food writing coming out of it. There are probably a lot of reasons for why publishers are maybe down to take more risks over there. But I am very, very hopeful that we get more narrative cookbooks, like we deserve them.
If you quickly could just talk a little bit about Cake Zine, because I think it's really in line with what you're talking about now. Give us a little overview.
We are an independent print-only magazine. We started about 4 years ago. We explore like culture and history and literature and art through a very narrow food lens. We started with cake, hence the name Cake Zine, and then very quickly moved farther afield in the pastry case. We are now, just this very week, celebrating our new issue, which is Steak Zine, which is testament to the fact that we really love to take a joke very seriously, and we headed into more sort of carnivorous territory. It's been a really important and formative part of my writing life, my intellectual and editorial life. I think we very much think of food as an arena for creative exploration, and it's very much sort of bringing various genres together under the auspices of food. So it's been really like exciting and meaningful. I run it with Eliza Abarbanel, who's an incredible editor, podcast host, writer, and Noah Emmerich, who is our art director and designer. And it's very collaborative, which I really love in my work. I guess in this moment, like there are so few outlets for young chefs, cooks, food writers writers in general to publish. And so I think we take open submissions for all of our issues, and it's felt really important to us to be publishing well-known writers alongside people who are maybe writing publicly for the first time and giving them the same level of editorial care. So it's been a really surprising and exciting project that continues to evolve. And we just launched subscriptions, which is sort of a bid to become more financially sustainable. It's obviously not exactly wise to be a print-only magazine in this day and age.
Right.
But we're really trying to figure out how to make it work, because I think we really believe in it as a part of the ecosystem.
Thank you. We'll include links to it because I think it's important to pay attention to it.
That'd be great.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us, Tanya. And congratulations on your book, Will This Make You Happy? It's such a great one.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks for having me.
Before we sign off, I want to tell you about a podcast that I've been enjoying a lot lately. Food Friends, Home Cooking Made Easy. The hosts, Sonia and Carrie, are former professional chefs and longtime friends, and their show is packed with inspiration and practical kitchen tips. And what I really love is that they often talk about their go-to cookbooks and favorite recipes. It's a perfect listen when you're on your way to the market or standing in the kitchen looking for ideas and inspiration. Find Food Friends wherever you get your podcasts and get more episodes and info at foodfriendspodcast.substack.com. Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are some other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts, and other merch, or just buy us a round of coffee. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, as always, to our editor, Abby Circatella. Until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.